Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to present the findings from the Genre project. I'm still not really sure where we got the name Genre. All I know is that at the early stages of the project coming together, I had nicknamed the project Weeds. And then as we got closer to submitting, one of my PIs said, we can't actually submit a project called Weeds. I think we had women entrepreneurs or something. So we now have Genre, and we're very delighted with it. And we also then are very proud of our logo as well, with the colours of the 4 countries in which we're representing. There's a lot of similarities, and congratulations, I suppose, also on the conference organisers, because there's a lot of similarities to our project and also the project before. Because when we look at women's technology entrepreneurship, in particular, when we look at policy, there is definitely that narrative of fix the woman approach, that it's the onus on the women to change, to buck up, lean in, whatever sort of phraseology that we want and to use. But within this project, it's very much a women-centric approach we have taken, and we explore the lived experiences of women tech entrepreneurs. It is a cross-national or transnational project, and we had 4 partners in 4 countries. We had Ireland, Israel, Norway, and Sweden. And the results that I'm presenting this afternoon are at the high level, and they are the aggregated results from the 4 countries. So basically, we were interested in looking at women's participation within technology entrepreneurship. So obviously that's something which, is of great interest, but we're thinking, well, how do we actually operationalize this? Because obviously it's quite a large elephant to try to eat. So we think, well, how can we actually break it down into much more manageable chunks or units? So the first thing that we did, we actually used the framework of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And, one of the things that was touched upon yesterday and also today is the importance of definitions. So, if I said to everyone in this room, and I have done this recently, if I said, do you know what an ecosystem is? Well, everybody would say, oh, yes, I know. And then if I asked you, what is your definition? There may be over 60 different definitions of ecosystem. So it's actually one of those words that, everyone uses in everyday life. But when it actually comes to its definition, it is quite varied, and it's actually then difficult to make sense of. And say you're actually referred to it as a chaotic conception, because it's one of those terms that actually practice is driving, and academia and theory is frantically trying to catch up with it. So that was one of the great discussions that we had initially was, okay, we're going to use ecosystem as our phrase and as to our framework, but what do we mean by that? And then also, how do we operationalize that? So we then decided, out of all of the definitions of an ecosystem and all the different frameworks that are presented, we would use 2 ecosystem intermediaries in which to actually make this project operationalized. And those 2 were incubators, and a business incubator in terms of the support mechanism, and also then investors, looking at the funding behaviours of investors, whether that's business angels or venture capitalists. So our overall objective was to the extent to which entrepreneurial ecosystems support or hinder women's technology entrepreneurship. And we were very much separating ourselves from broader entrepreneurship and specifically focusing on women who started tech businesses. And again, as you can imagine, and I'm sure the same with all the other projects, we also had hours of discussion on what is technology entrepreneurship and what sectors to include. But I think that's all the joys of having many different perspectives and the benefits within research. So in terms of our objectives and what did that result in, so the first thing that we did then was we actually did secondary research, and we did discourse analysis across the policies within each of the 4 countries supporting women's tech entrepreneurship. And we did that with a gendered lens. We then conducted primary research, which was all interviews. And with that, initially, we did say in our proposals we were only going to interview women, but we actually then did interview a small cohort of men as well. Now, it was not a comparative research per se, but it was more just to give another viewpoint, and we're very actually pleased that we did that because it has given us a richness to our findings. So in total, we interviewed 60 tech founders. We also then, in terms of, they had to have tendency in an incubator. So then we interviewed incubator managers. We interviewed 17 in total. And then in terms of the women and also the male founders, they also had to either have sought or have achieved investment. So then we've also interviewed 35 business angels and venture capitalists. So in doing that, we wanted to get their experiences of, I suppose, a support provision mechanism, but also then their experiences, and also to ascertain whether investors' behaviour was gendered in any way. Also then, and we'll talk a lot later, is about this idea that we develop tools in order to visualise and challenge underlying gendered norms that inhibit entrepreneurial processes within the ecosystem, and then also provide recommendations for a transnational gendered framework in helping us to understand women's lived experience, but also then to promote their participation within these ecosystems as well. So, genre, I suppose, at a glance or an overview, as I mentioned, we had in total 117 interviews. Also then, we're still in the process of this, but we have published articles, conference papers, and today we're just in the process of signing a contract for an edited volume. Also then, as we said, not only did we use this idea of the entrepreneurial ecosystem as a framework, we also used it as an approach. So one of the key aspects of an ecosystem is that not only are entrepreneurs influenced by the ecosystem, they also influence the ecosystem as well. This is important because it influenced our methodology, which was very much obviously qualitative because we were interested in the lived experience, but also then it was a micro-level approach as well. The other thing which it influenced, and I'll talk about in a moment, is this idea of promising practices and better stories which emerged from the ecosystem, and also, I suppose, could be considered a form of grassroots activism. Also then, we have participated in conferences, seminars, and also workshops in terms of disseminate the tools that we actually generated from the project. And also then our tools, we have a toolkit which we hope that will be beneficial, which will be ready in the next couple of weeks, and will be beneficial particularly for policymakers and those involved in implementing gender equality policies. So I suppose this is a very high level results. I think what surprised us, if somebody asked me, and you might ask me what surprised me about the findings, one of the things that surprised us was that obviously whenever we look at the 4 countries, they rate differently when it comes in terms of the gender equality indexes. And obviously the Scandinavian countries are considered to be higher on that index in terms of gender equality. However, when it came to women's technology entrepreneurship, all the 4 countries were about the same percentage. And I think that surprised us. And I suppose that's one of the things that we realised, that in order to tackle and address the issues of women's participation, it's not just one solution. It's multifaceted. Also, we talk a lot about a pipeline, and then we talk about leakages at the pipeline. And yes, you might be able to plug one of the leakage, but then another leakage may appear further down the pipeline. So it is multifaceted. And also then, I loved Susan's comment yesterday about gender being omnipresent as well. So I think that's a good way to think about how to approach and address this. So the other thing, and a lot of people have mentioned as well, we looked at this in terms of multi-level. So obviously, when we think about the macro level, we looked at the policies that were implemented to improve and to address women's participation in women's technology entrepreneurship. We also looked at the meso level, and that was the intermediaries in terms of the incubators and also the investors. And then the micro levels in terms of the actors in the ecosystem, which obviously were the founders and also then the investors themselves. And then interestingly, all of the women in all of the 4 countries referred to the challenges of juggling women's tech entrepreneurship and all the other stuff in terms of their family responsibilities as well. So I won't go through all of these, but I will pull out a few little things because they will they feed into some of the tools that I'll present shortly. I think it is interesting that, and maybe something we can discuss in the panel, is that gender inequality is a grey zone. And this came from the findings themselves, that it is maybe hard to pinpoint, it is hard in some cases to actually clarify, but a lot of the women said it is there, and it is there in their experiences, both of incubation and also investment. Also, one of the things that there was this reinforcing assumptions with regards to the image of the stereotypical entrepreneur. And, this reinforces what the literature would typically say, that the entrepreneur is 35, white and male. And then if you say, well, okay, well, what is the tech entrepreneur? Well, he's 35, white, male, and a nerd. So this also was, reflected in our findings as well. The other thing, there is this assumption, and I think in literature, academic literature, and also, I suppose, in the broader society, that women don't like risk, and women aren't risk takers. What our findings very much revealed, that women engage in a risk assessment. It's not that, we don't take risks. They actually weigh it up in the broader context in terms of their life situation, their family situation. So there is a risk assessment in terms of their family responsibilities. The other thing is that, there is differences, and I suppose we didn't specifically look at intersectionality, but there was a difference in terms of this risk assessment when it came to women's age, but also to their stage in the life cycle as well. In terms of the entrepreneurial finance and when it came to investors, I suppose one of the things that our research has highlighted, some of the strategies that women engage in order to navigate this gendered landscape. But I thought it's quite interesting if we look at the bottom of the slide, and that, investors themselves, because we asked them about, the gendered differences, whether, do they think that gender influenced women's experience of the finance or the investing landscape. And, it was interesting, a lot of them said, well, we're great. We have a great gender balance and we support women entrepreneurs. It's all those other investors, or it's all those other business angels. Then also, some said, well, it's the women in terms of, they don't have the ambition, they may not have developed networks, they may not have the resources. And then the third characteristic was pipeline issues. We just don't have enough women to actually select. We don't have enough women to invest in. So I think that was interesting in terms of they do recognise there are gender-related challenges, but these were some of the categories that were identified in terms of what they attributed them to. And there is no doubt that whenever we, did a very in-depth analysis of our findings, and we spent a lot of time actually, we used in vivo in terms of the cross-national comparison to try to come up with, I suppose, a generic coding system so that we could all make sense of our findings despite them being in different geographical and cultural contexts. And there's no doubt then that this idea of the entrepreneur as this stereotypical entrepreneur hero came across that, aggressive, independent, risk taker and competitive. And, and we can all smile at that and say, oh yes, we know that, and that's, that's the superhero image. But I think also we have to think about the implications of that, because there's definitely evidence to show that women, they self-select out. So if they think, well, okay, I don't have all of those, characteristics, or I'm not like a superhero, and I'm not Elon Musk, and all of those individuals that are always attributed to being entrepreneurs, they self-select out. Also then, they have difficulties identifying as an entrepreneur. I work with a lot of women, and when you ask them what they do, they'll say, oh, I have a wee project, or I have a wee business. And sometimes this wee business could be generating millions in turnover. But this comes from this lack of connection and fit with these stereotypes and these notions of who the entrepreneur is. And also then it can have more significant implications when it comes to investment and funders, that if somebody is actually presenting their funding opportunity and doesn't fit that stereotypical image, that can result in them not getting, the required funding. So there are implications of these norms, and I think it's important then that we need the tools to be able to detect the norms and also to reflect on them. And lucky for you, Genre has done that. So this is our toolkit for inclusive entrepreneurship ecosystems. So the tools we're hoping inspire change. So they are, we provide examples of promising practices, tools to enhance norm reflexivity, and also workshops in order to engage ecosystem actors to help them with this reflexive practice. So one of the things that I did, as well as leading this project, was to host a women's entrepreneurship conference in June. And we had an impact day because we wanted to show the relevance of research for policy and also the entrepreneurial environment. So we had our workshop, one of our first workshops of the project, and we tried out the tools, and this is our rich picture from the day. And I think it's, as you can see, the norms were very much identified in this, and also our toolbox as well. So I'll quickly go over some of the tools to give you an idea of what they are. So one of the things that we did from the project and from our interviews and from the narratives from the 4 countries was that we actually presented what we referred to as the norm persona. And this is very much contextualized within our findings, and we have one for each country. We also then have an alternative persona, and we can present these at the workshops. And this is really to get people to think about how can we push the boundaries of who we think and who should be an entrepreneur. And all of these personas are contextualized and generated from the findings of the project. The other thing that we did within the workshops is that we built on this idea of promising practices to incorporate better stories. So whenever we do have a workshop, it's not that we just talk about problematization, that we actually say to the ecosystem actors, give us an example of where you've had a good experience. Give us an example of something that is working well. So this idea of a better story is also quite empowering as well, because it's actually identifying a future and a pathway forward. And this is one of the promising practices. And we had 2 promising practices from each country. And also this is some of the worksheets that we use within the workshops. And we've also been able to use these within our own, I suppose, academic positions as well. And I have tried this recently out with 569 Year 2 students in terms of trying to really tackle who they believe the entrepreneurial stereotype is. So I'll quickly move on. So this is our economic impact. And I suppose the main thing for us is this toolkit. And for us, it's this enhancing, encouraging norm reflexivity. It's providing tools that you can detect and reflect on implicit norms. And I'll just then, these are our directions for future research. And I suppose one of the things that, and I'll hopefully we'll talk about in the panel, is that, Elizabeth Keelan said, and I really resonate with this, that gender seems to stick to women in a very particular way. So whenever we say gender, we automatically think of women. And as a result of that, whenever we say gender equality, we also think that it's women's issue to actually address and to sort out. So I definitely think there's more research to be done on men's role and how they perceive gender equality as well. And then one final thing is there's a very strong narrative that entrepreneurship is a good thing. We should have more entrepreneurs and it's good for all. But I think what our research has also shown, and our research wasn't about well-being, and we didn't go in thinking about well-being, but, stress came up, imposter syndrome came up. So also this idea that maybe entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, and maybe also that, in terms of this risk assessment, that those that do engage in it, engage in it because it's the best thing for them. So, okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.